Ambassador James Mitchell took a deep breath as the transport shuttle descended toward Viridian Prime. Through the viewport, he could see the massive structure of the Galactic Council chamber rising from the planet's surface like a crystal mountain. Behind him, 23 humans sat in quiet anticipation. Some were diplomats who had trained their entire lives for this moment. Others were scientists, linguists, and cultural experts. All of them understood the weight of what they were about to do. 300 years. That's how long humanity had watched the galaxy from a distance. 3 centuries of listening to alien broadcasts, studying their languages, learning their customs. Earth had discovered faster-than-light travel in 2127, and the first thing they found was that the universe was already crowded. 47 different species, all organized under something called the Galactic Council. So humanity had done something unusual. They had waited. They had watched. They had learned everything they could before making contact. Now, finally, the invitation had arrived. The Council wanted to meet humanity. James adjusted his formal jacket as the shuttle landed. His hands were steady but his heart raced. He carried a data tablet loaded with treaties, trade agreements, and cultural exchange programs. Everything humanity hoped to share with the galaxy. Everything they hoped to gain in return. Peace, knowledge, friendship among the stars. The chamber doors opened before them, and James led his delegation inside. The sight took his breath away. The room was enormous, carved from some kind of living crystal that pulsed with soft light. 47 different species occupied the various sections. Some were humanoid. Others were utterly alien. Beings made of energy. Beings that floated in liquid-filled spheres. Creatures with too many limbs or too few. All of them turned to watch as the humans entered. James walked to the central platform, feeling the eyes of the entire galaxy upon him. He placed his tablet on the speaker's podium and smiled, trying to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. Honored members of the Galactic Council, he began, his voice amplified throughout the chamber. We come from Earth as representatives of humanity. We come in peace, seeking friendship and cooperation among the stars. That's when he noticed the Krillians. They stood in the shadows at the chamber's edge. Massive insectoid beings, their chitinous armor gleaming dully in the crystal light. The Krillian Dominion controlled nearly a third of known space. Humanity's intelligence reports said they ruled through fear and military might. But James hadn't expected them to interrupt so quickly. A Krillian commander stepped forward, its mandibles clicking in what the translator rendered as speech. Humanity will submit to Krillian oversight. You are a young species. Wait. You require guidance. The chamber fell silent. James felt every human behind him tense. This wasn't how first contact was supposed to go. This wasn't the diplomatic exchange they had prepared for. With respect, James said carefully, humanity appreciates the offer, but we seek to join the Council as equal partners. We are a sovereign species. The Krillian's eyes glittered with something cold. Then humanity has made its choice. It happened so fast. Plasma weapons appeared from beneath Krillian armor. Other Krillians hidden among the various delegation areas stood and opened fire. The humans had been surrounded from the start. James saw his head linguist, Catherine, fall first. Then his chief scientist, David. Plasma bolts cut through the delegation like fire through paper. People he had worked with for years. Friends, colleagues, all of them dying in coordinated slaughter. James felt the heat before the pain. A plasma bolt caught him in the chest and he fell to the polished floor. The crystal beneath him was warm. He could see the faces of the other council species. But no one moved to help. No one intervened. They just watched as the Krillians murdered every human in the chamber. James tried to breathe but his lungs wouldn't work. He could see a camera, one of the thousands broadcasting this session across the galaxy. With his last strength, he turned his face toward it. Toward the billions of humans watching from Earth. He couldn't speak but he could move his lips. 2 words. A code that every member of the delegation had memorized but prayed they would never need. Protocol 7. Then darkness took him. On Earth, 5 light-years away, Admiral Robert Hayes stood in the command center of Sol Defense. He had been watching the live broadcast with hundreds of other officers. The feed had been delayed by the lightspeed transmission, but they were watching humanity's greatest moment of hope. Instead, they watched humanity's first massacre. Robert's jaw clenched as James fell. As all 23 humans were executed while the galaxy watched and did nothing. But he saw James's final message. Protocol 7. The code they had established centuries ago. The code that meant humanity's worst fears had come true. The galaxy wasn't peaceful. It was ruled by predators. Robert had 30 minutes before Protocol 7 became irreversible. 30 minutes to decide humanity's future. He looked around the command center at the faces of his officers. He saw rage, grief, and something else. Determination. "Get me the president," Robert said quietly, "and activate the emergency session. Every government leader. Every military commander. They have 20 minutes to vote." A junior officer turned to him, tears streaming down her face. "Sir, what is Protocol 7? Robert looked back at the screen, where James Mitchell's body lay motionless on alien ground. "It's the protocol we hoped we'd never use," he said. "It's the one where we show them what humanity really is." 18 minutes later, the vote came through. Unanimous. Every nation. Every leader. Every voice speaking as one. Protocol 7 was activated. In the dark spaces between stars, ancient machines began to wake. Shipyards that had been building in secret for 300 years. Weapons humanity had designed but never wanted to use. A military force hidden from the galaxy's eyes. Humanity had prepared for peace. But they had also prepared for war. The Krillian message arrived 48 hours after the massacre. It came through every communication channel humanity possessed, impossible to ignore or block. The translation was simple and brutal. Admiral Robert Hayes read it aloud to the Emergency War Council gathered in Geneva. "The species known as humanity will provide the following: all faster-than-light technology and specifications. Annual tribute of raw materials equaling 30% of total production. Submission to Krillian military oversight of all human colonies and installations. You have 1 week to comply." The room erupted in angry voices, but Robert raised his hand for silence. "There's more. They're demanding we hand over our entire civilian fleet for inspection. They think we have maybe 300 ships total. They think we're helpless." President Linda Chin leaned forward at the head of the table. "They massacred our people on live broadcast and now they want us to bow down. What do we tell them, Admiral?" Robert looked around the room at the faces of humanity's leaders. Some were old enough to remember when Protocol 7 had been designed. Others were young, born into a humanity that had always watched the stars with caution. All of them were angry. All of them were ready. "We tell them the truth," Robert said. "We tell them what happens when you murder peace." In the Kuiper Belt, beyond Neptune's orbit, something stirred in the frozen dark. What appeared to be a random cluster of ice and rock began to split apart. Beneath the camouflage, massive doors opened on a shipyard that stretched for thousands of kilometers. The facility had been built over 200 years ago, constructed by automated drones and hidden from any telescope or sensor. Inside, ships waited. Not the small patrol craft that humanity showed the galaxy. Not the civilian transports that carried colonists between worlds. These were warships. Real warships. The kind humanity had hoped never to use. The UESS Reckoning was the first to power up. It was 15 kilometers long, its hull made of metamaterials that could shift and adapt. Weapon systems that had been theoretical when they were designed now hummed with deadly purpose. The ship had been named years ago, chosen from thousands of suggestions. Because if humanity ever had to reveal its true strength, it would be for Reckoning. But the Reckoning was just one ship. Across human space, similar awakenings occurred. On a rogue planet drifting between stars, an entire moon split open to reveal a construction facility. In the asteroid belt, rocks that had been mapped and catalogued for centuries turned out to be hollowed shells concealing war machines. On Mars's moon Phobos, what everyone thought was a research station transformed into a military command hub. The ships emerged in their thousands. Then their tens of thousands. Dreadnoughts that made the Krillians' largest vessels look like toys. Carrier groups that could devastate entire solar systems. Weapons that didn't just destroy matter but could unmake it at the quantum level. Humanity had spent 300 years preparing. Not because they wanted war but because they understood something fundamental about the universe. Hope for peace but prepare for the worst. The galaxy's intelligence networks went into overdrive. Species that had thought they understood humanity suddenly realized they knew nothing. The Galactic Council convened emergency sessions, but they were paralyzed by shock and fear. How had humanity hidden this? How long had they been building? And most terrifying of all, what else were they hiding? Robert Hayes stood on the bridge of the Reckoning as it moved into position near Earth. Around him, the command crew worked with calm efficiency. These weren't fresh recruits. They were officers who had trained their entire lives for a war they hoped would never come. Some were second or third generation, children and grandchildren of the people who had first started building Protocol 7. "Sir, we have a firing solution for every Krillian installation within 20 light years," reported Commander Lisa Park from the weapons station. The AI is tracking their fleet movements. They're mobilizing, but they still don't understand what they're facing. Robert nodded. He opened a direct channel to the Krillian command frequency. This message would reach every Krillian ship, every Krillian world, every Krillian warrior. He spoke clearly and without emotion. Attention Krillian Dominion. I am Admiral Robert Hayes, Supreme Commander of the United Earth Space Force. You murdered 23 unarmed diplomats who came to you in peace. You broadcast their execution as a warning to the galaxy. Now I give you a warning. You have 72 hours. Surrender War Master Thex and every warrior who participated in the Viridian massacre. Dissolve your military and submit to Galactic Council oversight. Issue a formal apology to every species in known space. Or face the consequences. We gave you a chance for peace. You chose violence. Choose wisely now. The response came within an hour. The Krillian War Master himself appeared on screen, mandibles clicking in what translated as laughter. Humanity threatens the Dominion with 300 primitive ships? You are insects. We are bringing 8,000 vessels to crush your homeworld. We will make an example of Earth that the galaxy will never forget. The channel cut off. Across Krillian space, their Grand Armada mobilized. 8,000 warships, the largest military force the galaxy had ever seen assembled. They set course for Earth, confident in their overwhelming superiority. Robert watched the tactical display as red icons representing Krillian ships began moving. Beside him, Commander Park looked uncertain. Sir, 8,000 ships. That's more than we estimated. Should we revise our strategy? Robert shook his head slowly. No. They still don't understand. They think this is about numbers. They think warfare is about who has the bigger fleet. He touched the display, highlighting humanity's forces. Not hundreds of ships. Not thousands. Hundreds of thousands. All waiting in the dark. The 72 hours ticked down. The Krillian Armada was 3 days from Earth. They hadn't surrendered. They hadn't apologized. They had chosen war. Robert took a deep breath and gave the order that would change the galaxy forever. Execute Protocol 7. All fleets, weapons free. Show them what humanity really is. The Krillian Grand Armada dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Alpha Centauri system with all the confidence of predators who had never known defeat. 8,000 warships arranged themselves in battle formation, their hulls gleaming with the pride of a species that had conquered a third of the galaxy. War Master Thex stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking at the distant star that humans called home. Scan for their defensive fleet, he ordered. Let's see what these primitives think will stop us. The sensor officer's mandibles clicked nervously. Sir, I'm reading no ships in the immediate area. Wait, there's something odd. Multiple gravitational anomalies throughout the system. They don't match any natural phenomena. Thex waved a clawed hand dismissively. Sensor ghosts. Humanity is hiding, cowering near their homeworld. We'll crush them there and be done with this in a day. He was wrong. The trap had been set weeks ago. Humanity had been manipulating gravity in ways the Krillians couldn't imagine. Throughout the Alpha Centauri system, artificial gravity wells waited like invisible mines. The moment the Krillian vanguard pushed forward, everything changed. Space itself seemed to scream. Gravity wells collapsed inward with crushing force, then exploded outward. The first 1,000 ships of the Krillian advance simply crumpled, their hulls compressed to the size of cars before the gravity reversed and tore them apart. Metal, atmosphere, and bodies scattered into expanding clouds of debris. But that was just the opening move. From the darkness between planets, small objects began to appear on Krillian sensors. They were moving impossibly fast. Kinetic kill vehicles, launched years ago and accelerated over time to 90% of light speed. Each one was just a solid slug of dense metal, but at that velocity they carried the energy of multiple nuclear weapons. The impacts were catastrophic. When something moving that fast hits a ship, there's no explosion in the traditional sense. There's just instant vaporization. The kinetic energy converts matter directly to plasma. Entire Krillian battleships simply ceased to exist, replaced by expanding spheres of superheated gas. 30 seconds into the battle, 3,000 Krillian ships were gone. Evasive maneuvers. Thex screamed. Return fire. Where are they shooting from? But there was nothing to shoot at. The kinetic projectiles had been launched from across the system. Some had been waiting in orbit for months. By the time they hit, they were unstoppable. The Krillians were warriors though. They had fought for 1,000 generations. They didn't break easily. The surviving ships reformed their lines, shields at maximum, weapons scanning for targets. They began pushing forward again toward Earth, ready to exact revenge for this ambush. That's when humanity's actual fleet arrived. The UESS Reckoning emerged from faster-than-light travel right in the middle of the Krillian formation. But it wasn't alone. 500 ships appeared with it, each one massive, each one bristling with weapons the Krillians had never seen before. Admiral Robert Hayes stood on the bridge watching the tactical display. All ships weapons-free. Target their command vessels first. What happened next wasn't warfare as the Krillians understood it. Human ships didn't just fight, they moved through space in ways that seemed to break physics. They phased in and out of normal space, appearing behind Krillian lines, firing devastating salvos, then vanishing before return fire could reach them. It was like fighting ghosts. And the weapons themselves were terrifying. Humanity's main guns didn't just destroy ships. They unmade them. The beams hit Krillian vessels and matter simply stopped existing, leaving perfectly spherical voids that collapsed in on themselves. Ships didn't explode. They just disappeared, erased from reality at the quantum level. Commander Lisa Park coordinated the weapons systems with cold efficiency. Target the flagship. Let's see if Thex still thinks we're primitives. The Reckoning's main cannon charged and fired. The beam crossed the space between ships in an instant. Thex's flagship tried to evade, but it was too slow. The beam caught the ship's starboard side, and a third of the vessel simply vanished. Atmosphere vented. Systems failed. The mighty flagship began to tumble out of control. The battle raged for 6 hours. It was the most one-sided slaughter in galactic history. The Krillians tried everything. They attempted ramming attacks. They fired every weapon they had. They called for reinforcements. Nothing worked. Humanity's forces moved like dancers, always one step ahead, always striking from unexpected angles. Human ships used tactics the galaxy had never seen. They coordinated attacks across impossible distances, their AI systems sharing information faster than thought. They predicted Krillian movements before the Krillians made them. They turned the Krillians' own aggression against them, letting the enemy waste energy on empty space while humans struck from the shadows. When it finally ended, the Alpha Centauri system was filled with debris. Of the 8,000 ships that had entered the system, only 17 remained. And those were only alive because humans let them go. Let them run home with their terror. Let them tell the story of what happened when you murdered human peacemakers. Humanity's losses were counted with precision, 23 ships. Exactly one for each person killed at Viridian Prime. Across the galaxy, every species watched the recordings in stunned silence. The Galactic Council tried to call for an immediate ceasefire. The Krillians, for the first time in their history, begged for peace. They sent desperate messages offering surrender, offering anything to stop the human advance. Admiral Robert Hayes broadcast his response on every channel. You had your chance for peace. Ambassador James Mitchell and 22 others brought you that chance. You murdered them while the galaxy watched. Now you'll learn what humanity brings to murderers. We're coming for your worlds. We're coming for Thex. We won't stop until justice is served. You wanted to teach the galaxy a lesson about strength? Consider yourselves educated. The transmission ended. The Retribution fleet set course for Krillian space, and behind them, something even more terrifying happened. Throughout human territory, more ships emerged. Hundreds of thousands of them. Reserve fleets that had been waiting in the dark. Manufacturing facilities that had been producing weapons for centuries. The galaxy finally understood the truth. Humanity hadn't built a military. They'd built an apocalypse and kept it hidden for 300 years, hoping never to use it. Now that apocalypse was awake and it was hungry for justice. The Krillian Dominion had ruled through fear for over 1,000 years. Their empire stretched across hundreds of worlds, and no one had ever successfully challenged them. Now, in less than 3 weeks, that empire was collapsing. But not in the way anyone expected. The first Krillian colony world that humanity reached was called Kelia 9, a mining installation on the outer edge of Dominion space. The 17,000 Krillian civilians living there prepared for orbital bombardment. They'd seen the recordings from Alpha Centauri. They knew what human weapons could do. Many recorded final messages to distant family members. Others simply waited for death. Instead, human Marines landed in the city center. Commander Julie Peterson led the first squad out of the dropship. Her orders were clear, but she knew how insane they sounded. Remember, civilians are not combatants. We're here for the military command structure only. The Krillian civilians watched in confusion as human soldiers moved through their streets, weapons lowered. When a young Krillian female approached hesitantly, Julie stopped and raised her hands to show she was unarmed. We're not here to hurt you, Julie said through her translator. "Where is your military garrison?" The Krillian pointed with a trembling claw toward a fortified complex on the city's edge. Julie nodded her thanks and moved on. Behind her, other Marines were setting up medical stations and distributing food supplies. This wasn't an invasion. It was an occupation, but one run with precision and unexpected compassion. The military garrison was a different story. When Krillian warriors refused to surrender, human forces used overwhelming firepower to destroy the base in minutes. But even then they offered terms. Lay down your weapons and face trial or die fighting. Most chose to fight. Most died. This pattern repeated across dozens of worlds. Humanity's forces moved through Krillian space like a surgical blade, cutting away the military while leaving civilians largely untouched. They captured supply depots intact. They disabled defensive platforms rather than destroying them. They even provided medical care to wounded Krillian soldiers who surrendered. The galaxy watched in bewilderment. Species that had expected humanity to glass entire worlds couldn't understand this restraint. The Krillians had murdered human ambassadors in cold blood. Why wasn't humanity responding with total annihilation? Admiral Robert Hayes explained it in a broadcast to the Galactic Council. "We're not here for revenge. We're here for justice. There's a difference. Revenge would be easy. We could turn every Krillian world into radioactive dust. But that would make us the same as them. Instead, we'll show the galaxy what real civilization looks like." The Krillian Dominion tried to regroup. War Master Thex called for total mobilization, ordering every warrior to fight to the death. But the Dominion was fragmenting. Some worlds surrendered immediately. Others tried to declare independence from Krillian rule. A few military commanders refused Thex's orders and negotiated directly with human forces. The final battle came at the Krillian throne world itself. Thex had gathered the last loyal elements of his fleet, nearly 2,000 ships, in a desperate defense of the homeworld. The battle lasted 8 hours and ended with complete human victory. But Thex himself survived, his escape pod captured by human Marines during the chaos. 3 months after the Viridian massacre, War Master Thex stood in chains before the Galactic Council. The same chamber where he had ordered the murder of 23 humans. The same floor where Ambassador James Mitchell had died. The chamber was packed. Every council species had sent representatives. Media from across the galaxy recorded everything. This was history unfolding. Thex stood defiant, his mandibles clicking in what translated as contempt. "I regret nothing. The weak deserve subjugation. That is the law of the universe. Humanity proved themselves strong, so they have earned the right to rule. But I committed no crime. I followed the natural order." Admiral Robert Hayes stepped forward. He'd been appointed as humanity's chief prosecutor. He carried a data tablet containing evidence that had taken centuries to compile. Because humanity hadn't just been watching the galaxy for 300 years. They'd been recording, documenting, gathering evidence. "War Master Thex," Robert began, his voice calm but hard as steel, "you claim you followed natural law. Let me show the council what that really means." The chamber's holographic displays lit up with images. Krillian attacks on peaceful species. Colonies bombed from orbit. Populations enslaved. Entire civilizations erased because they dared to resist Dominion rule. Centuries of atrocities, all carefully documented by human observers who had been powerless to intervene. Until now. Robert turned to face the council representatives. Every species in this chamber knew. You had your own intelligence. Your own reports. You watched the Krillians commit atrocity after atrocity and you did nothing. What? Because you were afraid. Because the Dominion had the biggest fleet, the most weapons, the most ruthless warriors. His voice grew harder. But fear is not an excuse for allowing evil. You all share guilt in this. You enabled the Krillians by your silence. You let them believe that might makes right because no one was willing to stop them. Robert paused, letting his words sink in. Now you know there's something in this galaxy more frightening than the Krillian Dominion. Not because we're cruel. Not because we enjoy violence. But because we refuse to let fear silence us when we witness injustice. We will fight even when it costs us everything because some things are worth fighting for. The trial lasted 2 weeks. War Master Thex and 4,000 Krillian warriors were convicted of crimes against sapient species. The sentences were carried out according to galactic law. Quick, final. The Krillian Dominion, stripped of its military power, was reorganized into a confederation of independent worlds under council oversight. Krillian civilians were allowed to continue their lives. Their culture, their history, their identity remained intact. but their ability to wage aggressive war was ended. Across the galaxy, reactions were mixed. Half the Council species celebrated humanity as liberators. Species that had lived under Krillian threat for generations could finally breathe freely. They saw humans as heroes who had done what no one else dared. The other half of the Council feared humanity. They watched the recordings of human military power and realized that humanity could dominate the entire galaxy if they chose. What would stop these humans from becoming the next Krillian Dominion? Admiral Robert Hayes understood both reactions. And he knew both might be justified. Power corrupted. History proved that. But he also believed humanity could be different. They had to be. The galaxy was watching. 6 months had passed since the massacre at Viridian Prime. 6 months since humanity had revealed itself to the galaxy. 6 months since everything changed. The Galactic Council chamber looked the same as it had before. The same living crystal walls. The same elevated platforms for each species. But the atmosphere was completely different. Where once there had been an uneasy order maintained by fear, now there was something else. Hope perhaps. Or maybe just uncertainty about what came next. Admiral Robert Hayes walked across the main floor toward the speaker's platform. He wore his formal uniform, but he'd refused to carry any weapons. That had caused arguments with his security team, but Robert had been firm. "If I can't stand here unarmed, then we've already failed," he told them. He stopped at the exact spot where Ambassador James Mitchell had fallen. The crystal floor had been cleaned, of course. There was no trace of blood or violence. But everyone in the chamber knew what had happened here. The galaxy would never forget. Robert had been appointed as Earth's first representative to the Galactic Council. It wasn't a position he'd wanted. He was a military man, not a diplomat. But the president had insisted. "You ended the war," she told him. "Now you need to help us build the peace." He looked up at the assembled species. 47 different civilizations, all watching him with various expressions. Some showed gratitude. Others showed fear. A few showed barely concealed hostility. "We didn't want this," Robert began, his voice carrying through the chamber's acoustics. 6 months ago we sent Ambassador Mitchell and 22 others to this chamber. They came offering friendship. They came with treaties for trade, cultural exchange, and cooperation. They came in peace. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You know what happened next. The Krillians murdered them while you all watched. And we showed you our other face. The face we'd hoped you'd never see." Robert turned slowly, making eye contact with representatives from different species. "But I want you to understand something about humanity. We're not conquerors. We don't want to rule the galaxy. We don't want tribute or submission. What we are is your mirror." He let that sink in for a moment. "Treat us with respect, trade fairly with us, honor your agreements, and you'll find no better allies in this galaxy. We'll share our technology. We'll defend you from aggressors. We'll stand beside you as equals." His voice hardened. "But if you choose violence, if you prey on the weak, if you believe that might makes right, then yes, you'll see our weapons again. And they won't miss." The chamber erupted in discussion. Some species applauded. Others argued among themselves. It took several minutes for order to be restored. Over the following weeks, the Galactic Council underwent massive restructuring. For the first time in its history, real enforcement mechanisms were created. A pan-galactic defense force was established, with ships and personnel from multiple species serving together. Humans trained alongside aliens, sharing tactics and technology. The goal was simple: create a force strong enough to stop the next Krillian Dominion before it could rise. War crimes tribunals continued across dozens of worlds. Centuries of Krillian atrocities were finally being addressed. Justice was slow, but it was happening. Species that had suffered in silence now had their voices heard. But not everyone was happy with humanity's new position. In a secret facility on the edge of known space, representatives from 3 species met in darkness. The Vorlak Collective, a hive mind species with advanced biotechnology. The Selenar Consortium, masters of energy manipulation. And the Kepler Hives, a mechanical intelligence that viewed organic species with contempt. They had different reasons for their concerns, but they agreed on one thing: humanity's military power was too great, too concentrated, too dangerous. Together they began developing weapons in secret. Planning. Preparing for the day when they might need to challenge human dominance. On Earth, a different debate was raging. With the war over and justice served, many argued it was time to dismantle the massive military machine humanity had built. The resources being spent on maintaining hundreds of thousands of warships could instead go to exploration, colonization, scientific research. Robert Hayes stood before the United Earth Congress, arguing against demilitarization. The Krillians weren't unique, he said. They were just the first to test us. We've already detected signs that other species are watching, calculating, wondering if they can take us. A congresswoman stood to challenge him. Admiral, we can't live in a state of perpetual war readiness. We'll bankrupt ourselves. We'll become the very thing we fought against. Robert shook his head. I'm not suggesting we become aggressors. I'm suggesting we remain ready. Because the one certainty in this galaxy is that someone, somewhere, will mistake our desire for peace as weakness. And when that happens, I want to be prepared. The vote was close, but Robert's position won. Humanity would maintain its military strength, but under strict civilian oversight. The weapons that had brought down the Krillian Dominion would remain ready, hidden in the dark, waiting. 2 ceremonies took place in the same week. On Viridian Prime, a memorial was unveiled for the massacre victims. It stood in the plaza outside the council chamber, visible from orbit. 23 human figures carved from stone, forever frozen in the moment before their deaths. Every species in the council had contributed to its construction. Even the remnants of the Krillian people sent materials and craftsmen, trying to atone for the sins of their former leaders. Robert attended the dedication ceremony. He stood beside the statue of James Mitchell and remembered the man who had carried humanity's hopes. We'll make sure your death meant something, he whispered. But far from Viridian Prime, in the deep spaces of the Sol system, something else was happening. New shipyards came online. Vessels even more advanced than the Reckoning began taking shape in zero gravity. Research facilities developed weapons that made the previous generation look primitive. Humanity hoped for peace. They worked for peace. They built institutions for peace. But they also prepared for war. Because the galaxy had learned what humanity was capable of when pushed. And humanity had learned what the galaxy was capable of when no one stopped them. The age of innocent exploration was over. The age of naive hope was finished. Humanity had entered the galactic community not as children, but as adults who understood that peace required strength, that justice required courage, and that sometimes the only way to stop monsters was to show them an even greater monster. The galaxy would never see humanity the same way again. And humanity would never see the galaxy with innocent eyes. The story of Earth's first contact had begun with hope and ended in blood. Now came the harder part, building something lasting from the ashes. Whether that would be a true peace or just a temporary truce before the next war, only time would tell. But one thing was certain. Humanity was awake. And they were watching.